more than 3 decades since the end of the Vietnam War. The guns are long silent, but the conflict continues to inflict horrifying damage on millions of Vietnamese. They are the innocent victims of toxic chemicals used by US forces to clear the jungles. Agent Orange has now poisoned 3 generations, but the US says there's no scientific evidence to prove this. I'm Laura Kyle. On this edition of 101 East, we'll ask whether there'll ever be any justice for Vietnam's victims of Agent Orange. Between 1961 and 71, 80 million litres of toxic chemicals were poured over Vietnam. The US Army used the defoliant to deny the enemy cover and to destroy their food crops. But the effects of one of the most poisonous chemicals known to man reached far beyond the combatants. Millions of Vietnamese continue to suffer health problems, and babies are still being born with mental and physical defects. Hal Davis reports on the Vietnam War's most bitter legacy.
The ghostly traces of a long-gone war, written on the bodies and minds of Vietnam's children.
I feel so sad when I see her. I feel helpless. There's nothing I can do. The pain is so great because she hasn't done anything wrong. She's the victim of all this.
This is Hung, one of Vietnam's Agent Orange victims. She's now 34 years old, born blind and with severe brain damage. She lives in this one room in her family's Hanoi home, never leaving the house. Her father looks after her as best he can, feeding her, washing her, carrying her to the toilet, caring for her. He spent a decade fighting the South Vietnamese and the Americans in what's known in the West as the Vietnam War. He vividly remembers American planes dousing his position with toxic herbicides.
They sprayed us with a liquid. At the time, we were hiding in a tunnel underground. But even so, after they sprayed us, breathing was difficult, and our eyes watered as if we had pepper in them. We told each other they are spraying chemicals.
Tens of millions of litres of herbicide were sprayed by American forces on South Vietnam from 1961 to 1971. They were an attempt to make it easier to find North Vietnamese soldiers in the country's thick jungle. The best known was Agent Orange, taking its name from coloured markings on the barrels used to store the herbicides. The defoliants were contaminated with dioxin, a highly toxic chemical that's been linked with, among other illnesses, cancer. For many Vietnamese, it's clear that dioxin, and so the Americans, are responsible for the country's high level of birth defects.
All Vietnamese, not just Agent Orange victims, want the US government and the American chemical companies to take responsibility for the damage they have caused, not just to people's health, but also to the environment and the people of Vietnam.
Here in a small house in Hue province, that damage is obvious. This 21-year-old's father was also a soldier who remembers being sprayed. But further research is needed into how dioxin's effects pass down the generations. What does seem clear is that areas that were heavily sprayed have large numbers of children born with defects. A Japanese study found that children in such areas are 3 times more likely to have mental disabilities than those in places where no spraying took place. In the countryside, such problems are even more acute, made worse by poverty and a lack of access to health care. This family has 3 children. All have severe problems. The eldest daughter has extreme physical handicaps. Her sister is deaf and dumb, while their younger brother, also deaf and dumb, has a profound mental disability. The family says that with limited help from the authorities, the children's condition has reduced them to poverty.
They just stay at home. They can't get jobs. Me and my husband have to stay in the house to look after them too, so we can't work. We really don't know what our future will bring.
My life is so miserable. I really cannot imagine how my future will be like. Even my mum is sick. She has pains in her arms and legs. And I have pains all over my body. So I really do not know what to do now.
Vietnam does spend some money on helping the victims of Agent Orange. Centres like this one near Hanoi, called the Friendship Village, help a tiny proportion of the affected, educating the young and treating veterans. While the families of some victims get direct financial aid, $50 million is spent annually this way. But it's a fraction of the amount needed when between 2 and 4.5 million people are thought to be affected. The obvious solution, many Vietnamese say, is for the US to contribute substantial amounts of aid. That's not something Washington seems ready to do. This is Khe Sanh, scene of one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. The US government spent billions in prosecuting that war, but for the victims of Agent Orange, so far, only $6 million has been pledged. The bodies of the Americans killed fighting on this hill, better known to them as Khe Sanh, were returned home. That happened across Vietnam during the war and after the conflict ended. The US has made a determined effort to bring the remains of missing servicemen home. It's cost well over $100 million, a laudable tribute to the country's troops, but also an indication of the relative unimportance of Agent Orange victims to Washington. That's not lost on many Vietnamese.
3 million at first, and then another 3 million, a total of 6 million. Even after the extra money, it is such a small amount compared with a big issue like this. Many people cannot believe how unrealistic this is.
The first US combat troops in Vietnam landed in Da Nang in 1965. The massive airbase they were sent to protect is appropriately where much of the $6 million will be spent. It's now an Agent Orange hotspot. Defoliants were stored here with few precautions and sometimes simply dumped onto the ground. US government funds are helping pay for some of the cleanup. An American non-profit group, the Ford Foundation, is also helping, putting in concrete caps to help prevent dioxin leaking further into the soil. Its country director says that Washington's pledge of $6 million is at least a start.
To an outsider it seems slow, but the good news is that it's there, and it wasn't there before. That is, that there are beginning to be some resources, and now the challenge is to see that not only are they used briskly, but they're used well.
But for children like these in a Da Nang school, substantial help anytime soon is unlikely. In March, the US Supreme Court said it would not hear an appeal against the manufacturers. That effectively ends hopes of winning compensation. They're already members of the third generation of Vietnamese victims. The danger is that if Vietnam doesn't receive significant help soon to pay for testing and treatment, then this generation will not be the last one affected, condemning many more children to lives that are stunted and damaged.
Coming up after the break, we'll be speaking to the US ambassador to Vietnam to ask whether America is doing enough to help those affected by Agent Orange. Do stay with us on 101 East.